I can easily say that the original Metal Gear Solid is easily in my top 10 games of all time. It's a timeless tale about a Special Forces soldier sent to a facility in Alaska, dealing with arse-jiggling physics, a mind-controlling dominatrix, electrical torture, and a showdown against a giant nuclear missile-launching tank.
How do I stop it?
Really sparked my love for the franchise, one that eventually grew even bigger with the release of MGS2 and then MGS3. And it eventually got remade in 2004 exclusively for the Nintendo GameCube with Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, developed by Silicon Knights.
That's the official story.
A group that actually had a really impressive resume beforehand. I mean, these are the guys who made the first Legacy of Kain game, along with the awesome Eternal Darkness. And at the time of its release, the response to Twin Snakes was pretty positive. Mostly because I think there just wasn't really anything else to compare it to, given how the whole remake trend was still kind of in its infancy at that point.
No, I'm serious.
I mean, we did have the Resident Evil remake come out a couple years prior, which is still the best example of how remaking a game should go. But 2004 was a whole lot different to 2024, where it seems every couple of months we get another new remake or remaster to add to the pile. Either way though, it's a game that's been a hot topic of discussion ever since, as to whether or not it's any good in regards to the other entries in the series, but also just remakes in general. And while I did briefly touch on this one in my MGS1 video a few years back, I've still never done a dedicated video on it.
You're right. We have to take responsibility.
Well, seeing as this is the year we're supposed to be getting Metal Gear Solid Delta, I suppose now would be a perfect time. Yeah, kept you waiting, huh?
Shut up in there, will ya?
Right, so before I get too far into the video, I do have to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Rocket Money. So we all know how the price of living is constantly going up these days, and even something as simple as a run to the supermarket can be a bit of an investment. It doesn't help either that most of us are probably subscribed to God knows how many monthly subscription services with things like Netflix or Apple Plus. Well, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that lets you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money much better. The good thing about Rocket Money is that it goes through all of your credit card transactions and is really handy as a way to identify all those recurring charges, helping you remove a lot of unwanted subscriptions. And you can remove all of this stuff with just a couple of taps, no long-winded customer service calls either. But it's also helpful if you just want to set a budget, something that works within your personal lifestyle, allowing you to monitor your spending by categories and even get notified if you've gone over your limits. Overall, Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when they use all of its features, with over $500 million in total in cancelled subscriptions. And you can unlock even more features with Premium. So to save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. To do that, go to rocketmoney.com/GmanLives or click the link in the description to get started for free. That's rocketmoney.com/GmanLives to get started now for free. Now story-wise, Twin Snakes doesn't stray too far from the original Metal Gear Solid. In fact, it's pretty much just the exact same game in that regard, only in an updated engine with a whole heap of mechanics added in from Sons of Liberty.
I see.
The gist is that you're still playing as the legendary Solid Snake, brought out of retirement and sent into the Shadow Moses facility in Alaska to try to stop a special forces unit called Foxhound, who are threatening to launch a nuclear missile if their demands aren't met.
Yes, the president will break.
And Snake is the only one capable of saving the day, sent in there with little more than a pack of cigarettes smuggled up his ass.
Really?
And with there being a whole lot more going on there that he doesn't even know about. Just like the original game, the whole thing opens with you infiltrating the docks and then making your way through the base, taking on the various members of Foxhound along the way.
That's right.
Along with teaming up with one of gaming's all-time best tomboys and an anime fan.
Sorry, but no.
So it is, for all intents and purposes, a near identical journey from start to finish, at least as far as the story is concerned. One of the first things you'll notice though, which is kinda hard not to, is how graphically different the whole thing looks, making a similar leap in fidelity to the one that MGS1 made with MGS2. The reason being, quite simply, that this is using the same graphics engine from Sons of Liberty.
A surveillance camera.
However, I do think it is a bit of a mixed bag there, and in some ways, I'm not even sure I'd say it's better looking than the original. I mean, obviously the game runs at a high resolution and has a higher frame rate and stuff like sharper textures, but the overall image just seems to be so dark and muted. The outside areas, for instance, have this much more realistic looking snowstorm, but what that equates to is more or less just this cloud of fog covering everything, which really makes it harder to appreciate a lot of these finer details. And this is something that seems to occur a lot throughout all of these environments, really sticking out too when you compare it to how footage looks in the original. And I'm not talking about things like the textures or the modeling, I'm talking about the overall aesthetic. To me, that original game looks vivid and striking. It might be pixelated, dithered and low resolution, but there's a sense of the image popping out and coming to life. And all of the visual elements really working together to create the greater picture. All of the stuff in Twin Snakes though, it just looks so dull in comparison. Like there's a complacency with the newer engine and they've settled for a far more generic art style. The fight against Vulcan Raven, for instance, is the perfect example. Now this is supposed to be in some kind of frozen warehouse, but if they didn't have that ice filter around the edge of the frame, well, then you'd hardly know it. But then on the other hand, when you look at the original, you can take one look at this room and know right away that it's so cold that if you tried to take a piss in there, well, the stream would probably freeze before it even hit the ground. One of my favourite looking areas in that original game was this one between the warehouse and Rex's lair that had this massive runoff of polluted water, and it looked really impressive, you know, had they managed to replicate this large stream. And again, like, check out how this same area looks in Twin Snakes.
What the hell happened here?
More than that, it also never really feels like it's taken full advantage of the updated engine either, in the sense of including physics or more interactivity with the environment. The tanker in MGS2 as an example is an absolute highlight for the series, just in all those various ways that you can mess around with the game world. But even later on during the whole Big Shell chapter, there was still so many ways you could mess around with all the various props. But Twin Snakes, despite adopting so many of MGS2's other features, which we'll address soon enough, it has none of this stuff. I mean, you can shoot the odd window, computer monitor, or Mario Brothers figurine, but most of it just feels static and lifeless. What I kind of find weird too is how, despite having updated so many aspects of the presentation, they've still gone with those old 2D portraits during the codec calls.
Damn.
I mean, you think they'd adapt the same 3D format they used in the second game?
That's not possible.
But weirdly, they're still using the same one from 1998.
Boy, oh boy, it's just like them. Nobody's told you anything, did they?
Now, if we're using the Resident Evil remake as a poster child, which realistically we should be, then you got the perfect example there of everything that a remake should and could be. Not only was that remake a complete reimagining of the original, keeping the tone, the plot, and the premise, but then it also added in numerous features and mechanics, along with tweaking certain aspects to improve the overall gameplay loop. So one of the big changes there was adding in entirely new puzzles, along with improving the layout of the mansion to help reduce the amount of backtracking and give the player new routes to discover. The voice acting, the soundtrack, and the visuals were also greatly overhauled.
Stand back!
Removing a lot of the unintentional cheese from that original, with new scenarios and sequences included as well, like the whole subplot going on with Lisa Trevor. And then probably what was the best inclusion with the Crimson Heads. Reanimated zombies that moved a lot faster and did more damage than the standard Garden variety.
Surprise, motherfucker!
And enemies which almost required planning ahead, as you'd have to go around burning corpses with a limited kerosene supply to stop these guys from showing up.
That's a spicy meatball!
So yeah, like overall it was a journey that felt familiar, but then also fresh, adding in enough new features and surprises, but making sure they felt balanced with the gameplay. Twin Snakes, on the other hand, is kind of a mix of both. I mean, it's still a beat-for-beat remake of the original game, but then it also adds in a whole heap of mechanics from Sons of Liberty to make it feel updated. The problem is that a lot of these don't quite fit.
Please.
Because the vast majority of the game is still completely unchanged from how it was back in 1998. You know, from when it was designed without those features in mind. And you'll get to see what I'm talking about right from that opening sequence, where you're able to get the newly added M9 pistol in the very first area at the docks.
What?
And even right away, like, this is a bit of a problem, because that opening area was supposed to keep you unarmed as a means of teaching the player, you know, in a relatively low threat environment, the basics of evading enemies and learning their patrol routes. Right away in Twin Snakes though, we're given a gun that lets us knock everyone out, so that lesson is completely missed.
Freeze.
Same thing happens once you reach the helipad as well, with the player being able to easily take out all these nearby soldiers, and even shoot out all the nearby cameras as well, using the SOCOM pistol and that first person aiming. Oh yeah, that's also worth mentioning too, is how one of the big features that Twin Snakes added in was that first person aiming system from Sons of Liberty, which genuinely was pretty groundbreaking when we first got it on the PS2. With the different body parts you shoot affecting how enemies would react, and in the case of the M9 pistol, how long it would take for them to pass out after getting hit. When you reach the tank hangar, you'll see even more how much this breaks things. Now in the original, most people would have probably crawled in from that vent on the second floor at the helipad, which brings them out on the second level of the hangar, overlooking those two guards patrolling the bottom. And this was again supposed to be a bit of a learning experience for the player. Firstly, having to get past two cameras, either by using chaff grenades or just avoiding them, along with hopefully directing the player to the thermal goggles in that nearby room. Before then letting us decide how to avoid those guards on the bottom floor to make it to the elevator unscathed, because at this point you didn't have too many weapons or a suppressor for the SOCOM. However, in Twin Snakes, again, none of that really matters, because you can simply shoot those two patrolling guards from the top floor with the M9 and then simply vault over the railing to drop down, skipping those cameras and the walkway entirely. Now the simple solution here would have just been to have the M9 only available in the armory, which would have made a lot more sense than hiding one in the locker at the docks or another one underneath a truck in the helipad. But either way though, like, the inclusion of this gun and the first person aiming specifically instantly removes a whole lot of the challenge to these first few environments. Environments which were really trying to educate the player on mechanics they'd have to deal with for the remainder of the game. But there's still plenty of other examples of how this manual aiming is able to completely shatter the difficulty. Like trying to get past those lasers on the way to the snowfield, now you can just shoot out each of these one by one by aiming for the sensors on the side, completely removing that asshole puckering tension of trying to navigate through these things in the original, as well as nullifying one of the few times the cigarettes and the thermal goggles came in handy. Cameras throughout the game that you'd previously have to use a chaff grenade on or just avoid can now be simply shot with the SOCOM. And once you get the suppressor, you can do this without alerting nearby enemies. It's just an overall sense of these mechanics making the game way easier than it should be. Also highlighted by the fact that you begin the game with a full health bar, whereas in the original your health slightly improved after each boss fight.
You still okay? Want me to go on?
As for the rest of the campaign, well, the whole DARPA Chief and Meryl escape sequence pans out mostly the same as the original.
Shut up in there, will ya?
And the whole shootout as she and Snake escape the area is still pretty fun, even if it is again just made incredibly easy with first person aiming. I mean, these guys will just funnel into the room one after the other in the exact same pattern more or less, and you can get through the whole thing by just pretty much pre-firing at their heads as soon as you see them.
Thanks for the help.
Still though, not a bad set piece, and it retains that iconic and also plot pivotal shot of Meryl's jiggling ass, which shows us that the male gaze is actually a very important life skill to have. Oh yeah, and I appreciate that new shot of her ass as well while she's eavesdropping in on Snake's conversation.
A truly historical weapon.
What?
Why are you staring at my...
But it's the bit after this when Snake first meets Ocelot and onward where things kinda start to go to shit. And I genuinely can't believe that the developers didn't pick up on this during playtesting, because this Ocelot fight has been reduced to a joke.
Now we'll see if the man can live up to the legend.
12 seconds later.
Hiding won't help you.
So yeah, like, you know how in the original game, how you had this whole back and forth chase sequence, running around in circles with the guy like you're playing Duck Duck Goose, getting off a cheeky shot here and there when the guy stopped to reload. Yeah, well, now you can literally just stand in one place and shoot him in the head over and over. But that's not the worst part, alright? The worst part is what follows when the cyborg ninja shows up.
What?
Because this time, instead of the guy just showing up and acting all aloof and mysterious after having removed Ocelot's second favourite drinking hand, now there's an extended fight scene between him and Snake, which is absolutely fucking ridiculous. with Snake doing the kind of acrobatic moves that he doesn't even come close to pulling off during actual gameplay. Not to mention that it shows Snake holding his own against the ninja, completely removing the threat that that character had, seeing as their first fight ends in a stalemate. But this is a trend you're going to see throughout the whole game as well, especially during certain cinematics.
Really?
Like seeing Snake dodge multiple bullets, one firstly from Revolver Ocelot, and then again later on against Sniper Wolf. During the fight against Liquid Snake and the Hind D, he even does a backflip off a missile, which is in mid-air mind you, before then firing back at the chopper and blowing it up before he even hits the ground. And yeah, like look, I get it, this stuff looks cool and it's supposed to be over the top, but it also completely removes any sense of believability to the character. I mean look, here's the thing about the Metal Gear Solid games, okay? Yes, they're batshit crazy and completely outlandish, but you were always seeing this stuff through the lens of the protagonist, the one person who was always grounded in reality. Oops, there goes gravity. Whether it be Raiden watching a bisexual flamenco dancing vampire eviscerate a room full of Navy SEALs, or Big Boss taking on a human spider, a man who can control wasps, or a literal ghost. And although they might have had some pretty cool moves of their own, their physical capabilities were still limited to a believable degree. Even in MGS4, when you had Raiden taking on a group of geckos, you were watching that through essentially Snake's perspective. And at no point did Snake suddenly whip out a katana of his own and start cutting these things down. And look, before anyone else says it, no, Metal Gear Rising doesn't count here. So my point is, if you've got Snake backflipping over debris and literally dodging bullets in a cutscene, only for him to be completely unable to replicate those moves when the player's in control, well, then it just starts to create a bit of a disconnect. And yes, I know that this was the intention all along. Kojima himself is even said to have encouraged the director to make this stuff as crazy as possible, but that doesn't make it any less silly to watch. There's this popular fan theory I keep seeing repeated all the time, that the entire Twin Snakes experience is supposed to be Otacon retelling the events of Shadow Moses to someone else like a gushing fanboy. But really, to me, like that just sounds like a dumb way of people trying to cope with the fact that some of the cutscenes in this game are fucking stupid. It just comes from the height of the whole post-Matrix era, where everyone was obsessed with slow motion during action scenes, and this game is a perfect example of how something as cool as essentially bullet time can really lose its edge when it's overused. The irony of it too is that during one of the cinematics where Snake actually looked cool and avoided something in the original game, during that scene where he's ambushed by Vulcan Raven and the tank, in the remake they have him get hit instead, not once, but twice. Once by the tank shell, and then again soon after by an exploding barrel. But what they absolutely butchered the most though, I think, is the stuff with Grey Fox, the ninja, outside Otacon's lab.
I've been waiting for you, Snake.
Now, in the old version, this was a really unsettling sequence where you entered this hallway and then could hear the sounds of nearby soldiers screaming as they were getting eviscerated. Then you enter that next room and all you saw was a pile of dead bodies, scattered across the floor in a grisly manner to suggest that the way these guys departed this world probably wasn't very pleasant.
It looks like they were cut by some type of blade.
No shit.
And then once you reach the end of the hallway, there was a short glimpse of the ninja before he vanished into a nearby doorway. And it was a perfect precedent to the encounter that was about to follow, finally putting us up against this guy who until this point was a bit of a murderous enigma. We'd heard that he'd killed a bunch of people and saw him chop off Ocelot's hand without giving a single shit, so we knew that this guy meant business, despite having only seen him on screen for like 10 seconds. In Twin Snakes, they replicate this hallway sequence, only this time they do a goddamn play-by-play of the entire encounter. Showing the ninja killing every single one of these soldiers in gruesome detail. Which, yeah, on the one hand is obviously pretty cool, but it totally removes the mystery surrounding the character. In the original, like, just that horrific sound of swinging metal and blood-curdling screams was enough. We didn't need to see every single one of these soldiers getting killed one by one, because what wasn't shown, our imagination could fill in the blanks. This time though, they thought we needed to see someone getting slammed against a wall over and over to tell us what we already know. Oh yeah, and what do they replace that nightmare fuel ambient noise with? Well, how about nothing?
What?
And that's really the key word here, subtlety, which is something the Twin Snakes frequently lacks.
It makes no difference.
Like seeing Meryl acting like a fucking weirdo later on when she's being controlled by Psycho Mantis. Because, yeah, I don't know, in case it wasn't obvious enough to begin with, now she needs to dance around the room like she's a spider monkey tripping on DMT.
Okay.
I don't know, man, in regards to that ninja hallway scene, it just takes something that was a great example of what the hell happened here and changes it into, oh, that's what's happened here. And it really makes me think that they just didn't understand how to use that character. It doesn't help either that his new voice actor is really inconsistent, sounding like the only brief they gave the guy was to be as edgy as possible.
Snake, be careful. There are claymore mines around there.
And you hear that the most during the boss fight, where all the intensity and emotion with his dialogue is completely lacking.
Good. Now we can fight as warriors.
This was supposed to be about a guy literally having the sense beaten back into him. And each blow he traded with Snake was helping him reclaim his identity and humanity bit by bit. And you could absolutely hear that internal struggle and conflict in the guy's voice.
I've been waiting for this pain.
Here though, there's just none of that.
Hurt me more.
Hurt me more.
I do want to say though that I find it hilarious to think that the new guy voicing the ninja, Rob Paulson, also did the voices for Pinky from Pinky and the Brain, not to mention the Animaniacs and Carl Weezer from Jimmy Neutron.
A fight to the death with you. Only in that can my soul find respite.
Oh right, well, there you are then.
But really though, just in general, the voice acting here isn't as good as it was in the original. Which, you know what, to be fair, is probably gonna happen if you're asking people to try to replicate something they did 6 years earlier. It's kind of like asking Al Pacino to go back and redo Scarface. I mean, I'm sure the guy would give it a good crack, but there's no way it's gonna be as good as his original performance. Now apparently the reason they had to re-record all of this stuff was because that original audio wasn't that great. And you know what, truly, in the game's defense, most of the dialogue here is fine.
You were lucky. We'll meet again.
The thing is though, when it is bad, it's really bad.
Hurry! Get away! Gray Fox! Gray Fox!
My favorite example is the scene where Otacon realizes that the guys with the stealth suits are hiding in the same elevator as Snake and waiting to ambush him. And I can still remember the goosebumps I got playing through that original sequence. How you're slowly putting the pieces together here bit by bit, just like Snake and Otacon do, before Otacon suddenly freaks out as the whole thing clicks.
Look out, Snake! The guys who stole my stealth prototypes are in there with you!
For this version in Twin Snakes though, he sounds like what could be best described as mildly concerned.
Look out, Snake! The guys who stole my stealth prototypes are in there with you.
Help. Police. Murder.
Another big change is that Mei Ling no longer speaks with an accent, now sounding much more American, which is actually one of the few changes that doesn't bother me.
What's this? I'm being hit on by the famous Solid Snake?
Considering her character is supposed to be Asian American to begin with, and it also fits into how she sounds in MGS4.
So they won't be able to see the Missouri until they surface. Hakiba!
But a lot of the other voice work, it kind of sounds like the stuff they did before everyone was warmed up.
Is that right?
And there's lines in there where you hear someone say something and it's kind of like, was that the best take they had?
So what's the deal then?
I don't know.
I mean, listen to how they massacred my boy Johnny Sasaki.
Shut up in there, will ya? Shut up in there, will ya?
While we're on the subject of audio, it's also worth mentioning the music and how it really can't hold a candle to the original either. Even just the new version of the music in the docks right off the bat. Like, it just lacks any kind of energy, coming across like basic ambience instead.
Hold it! What the hell is that shit?
I do like how there's different themes now for each area, for the different alert and caution states, along with each boss even having their own theme as well, but honestly, none of this stuff is really all that memorable. Oh yeah, and don't even get me started on the game over screen.
What's wrong? Snake!
One of the more memorable songs from the original was The Best Is Yet to Come, with these haunting female vocals that played during Snake's infiltration. And then again later on during the ending credits. It served its purpose as a really gorgeous piece of music, but the lyrics were also kinda metaphorical, reflecting Snake's eventual realization that despite his past and upbringing, he still had a future worth living.
I think it's time we look for a new path in life.
I mean, it's arguably one of the most iconic songs from that original game, and here it's just missing completely. In fact, the only really good tracks here are the ones that are essentially just remixes of the original, like the music in the tank hangar for instance, and then later on before you confront Psycho Mantis. Even just a lot of the sound effects aren't as punchy or impactful anymore, like compare how the SOCOM sounds in both versions.
This is better.
Now in the game's defense, I don't dislike everything about it, in fact I really appreciate certain aspects. For instance, including the various guard behaviours from MGS2 is actually, I think, a welcome addition. So now like in Metal Gear Solid 2, whenever you're detected, enemies are going to call for backup in the form of soldiers armed with riot shields and often shotguns. And if you manage to escape into a nearby room, they'll go into that incredibly cool mode where they breach the room and clear it, trying to flush out Snake from any hiding spots.
Clear!
And it's a really cool inclusion, considering that in the original, if you ever got detected, you more or less just had to run away. I mean, you could hold out for a little while, maybe, but eventually you'd run out of ammo and rations and be forced to leave the area. Twin Snakes, though, gives you that option to elude the guards if you can stay hidden for long enough, and they'll go through a heightened caution state before eventually resuming their patrol. For some reason though, Twin Snakes can only spawn in 2 guards as backups now instead of 4 as it was in Sons of Liberty, and if you end up tranking these guys, then they won't be able to send in any more reinforcements. I also like too how you can still mess around with the enemy AI, with the simple things like shooting out their radio so they can't call in for backup.
It's the enemy. I need it.
You can now shove bodies into lockers or cubicles to hide them away, and also use those porno mags as a bit of a distraction. And just like in MGS2, sneak up behind guards and hold them up at gunpoints for their dog tags.
Freeze.
Sadly though, this has no benefit whatsoever, seeing as acquired dog tags earns you absolutely nothing in the long run. It's also disappointing too how none of these guys ever talk back or give you shit when you try to hold them up either. I always thought that was a really cool feature in MGS2, how you'd eventually come up against a tough guy who'd refuse to cooperate.
Are you going to shoot me?
In Twin Snakes though, all of these guys just hand over the goods without so much as a second thought. I mean, yeah, what a bunch of pussies.
Help.
What else do I like? I don't know. I like how you can skip through entire codec calls now by just pressing the A button once, as opposed to having to mash the circle button over and over.
Oh, really?
Plus, I really like how you don't have to swap back to the keycard every time you want to enter a locked door, which was an absolute godsend that the second game added in. Plus, an even more subtle change that I appreciate is being able to shuffle sideways while crouching, which really only pops up once in the Foundry, when you got to get past that piece of machinery, but let me tell you man, that again just saves much needless downtime. As for the game now allowing a proper non-lethal playthrough, well, that's definitely a good idea on paper, though it is something that I'm still not entirely sold on. And I get that this has been again done to keep it more in line with the second game, but ultimately the only benefit to going non-lethal is trying to achieve a better end rank. The whole problem there too is that it does kind of go against the whole point of what the story was supposed to be about. I mean, in the original game, the revelation towards the end of the story as to the real identity of the Genome soldiers was something that was supposed to be shocking. Especially considering you'd probably just spent the last 8 or so hours gunning these guys down without a second thought. Here though, there's no weight to it at all if you've just spent the last 5 or 6 hours knocking everyone out instead. Another thing that didn't really work for me was the updated melee moveset, which again replicates the one from MGS2, with Snake doing a spinning kick instead of his roundhouse kick from the base game. And the problem there is that the range for the spinning kick is less than the roundhouse kick was, meaning you now have to be standing practically neck to neck with someone for the third hit to connect, something which I would frequently stuff up, causing me to mess up the combo. And this is a bit of an issue because Twin Snakes has boss fights that are entirely melee focus, namely the fight against Grey Fox and Liquid Snake. Whereas MGS2 had no boss fights playing as Snake where you ever had to use the melee combo, so it obviously didn't arise as much. I don't know, I just found that it made those boss fights really frustrating, because time and time again that third kick just wouldn't bloody connect, making things more drawn out than they needed to be.
Hurry!
Overall, I'd say that's the constant feeling I got with Twin Snakes. I mean, in terms of the base appearance and how the whole thing looks in action, you really would think it'd be an objective improvement over the original. But then when you really start to get into the whole nitty-gritty and experience it all firsthand, you realise that despite adding in all of this stuff, they just didn't quite hit the same nail on the head as the original.
Grey Fox!
And if I really wanted to nitpick, I'd also point out how it's completely lacking those VR training missions as well.
Impressive, Snake.
Still though, a lot of those more memorable moments in the game are still the ones that play out the best, because these areas aren't inherently broken or unbalanced now simply because you can attack from a first-person perspective. Like the fight against Liquid in the Hind D as an example, which is still awesome, was always played through a first-person perspective with the Stinger Launcher.
Nice shot!
Same thing with baiting Vulcan Raven around that room and letting the dude step on countless claymores. The whole fight against Sniper Wolf is more or less unchanged as well, aside from the fact you can now use a PSG-1T against her instead, you know, in case you're trying to be non-lethal. A choice which is far more attractive than running all the way back to the armory to get the actual PSG-1, considering that tranquilizer rifle's back near where you fought Psycho Mantis. I want to say too that I do like Wolf's updated appearance.
No shit.
And that insane amount of cleavage she's rocking now is one of those updates that actually has validity.
I'm not interested.
Emphasizing her role as this beautiful yet deadly assassin.
I'll die after I kill you.
The whole Mantis sequence is pretty much the exact same formula too, swapping over to a different controller port at the beginning of the fight so he can't read your inputs. It's still one of the most memorable fourth wall breaking moments in the entire franchise, just with the slight issue that your viewpoint here is way more zoomed in now, giving you no real situational awareness and making it tougher to track his movements. But still, the same fight through and through, and no doubt responsible for messing up the minds of people who play Twin Snakes for the first time.
Stop!
Later on, you're still given that choice of resisting the torture from Ocelot or giving up like a little bitch.
I hope you can still look at yourself in the mirror, my friend.
Though it does seem that the button mashing is a lot easier here than it was on the PlayStation, which does remove a lot of the tension throughout this whole ordeal, really making it so the only reason you'd surrender is to save time on a playthrough or to get Otacon's ending.
I feel like a new man.
And then that long and tedious climb up the comm tower is still as long and tedious as it always was, arguably being one of the main reasons the body armor exists. What is definitely the biggest change though is the sequence during all of those power key inputs. Now, in the original, this was a pretty lengthy sequence where you had to go back and forth between Rex's lair to the foundry and then the warehouse where you first fought Vulcan Raven, changing the state of the power key so you could then input it 3 times into separate terminals.
Power code number 3 confirmed.
It was intended to serve as a bit of downtime and let the player catch their breath, you know, considering before this you'd just been back to back with constant action scenes. But it also revealed some pretty big character revelations during some crucial codec calls. Now though in Twin Snakes you've got this kind of secret option to simply use a conveniently placed steam and nitrogen pipe near the control room, which when you shoot at it instantly changes the state of the power key, removing all of that backtracking entirely. But then this also means that this grand series of events taking place behind the scenes back at HQ, some of which are pretty damn huge by the way, all seem to happen within the span of about 5 minutes. And look man, like Kojima might have some wacky ideas when it comes to his games, but the guy knew what he was doing with stuff like this, And that purposeful downtime felt like an integral component to the pacing of the storytelling.
What are you trying to say?
Now we go from finding out who Naomi is, to Naomi being arrested, to Naomi breaking out and somehow contacting Snake, followed immediately by Rex being activated.
You sure? I'm afraid so.
However, I would definitely argue that this is one of the objective improvements in the remake. More so as well because now you can get around that control room without ever having to climb over the top of Rex. It just greatly improves the flow of the last hour or so of the game, which is a godsend for multiple playthroughs.
So, it's true, isn't it?
Another way though, like regardless, the game still ends the same. Snake and Liquid beat 7 shades of shit out of each other on the wreckage of Rex, and then either Meryl or Otacon escapes with Snake on a jeep, before the whole thing comes to an end. And yes, like overall, if you play through the Twin Snakes for your first Metal Gear Solid experience, well then it's not entirely the worst thing that could have ever happened, because you still start and end up at more or less the same point. Liquid finally succumbs to Foxdie in the most overly dramatic way possible. And then our boy and Meryl head off on a snowmobile so he can show her why they call him Solid Snake. You know, because he has an erection.
Okay, so where to, Dave?
Bad bitches, that's my fucking problem.
Only thing is, instead of this ending taking place during sunrise, it instead seems to be during what's more or less nighttime, with Aurora Borealis in the background.
Aurora Borealis!
But hey, guess what, buddy? You've experienced the same story from beginning to end in 2004 as people did back in 1998. Now you can go and play Sons of Liberty and be amazed at how you still have no clue as to what's actually going on. I guess the final thing worth discussing is how to actually play this game in the first place. And considering that it's only ever seen the light of day on a single platform, that does make our options pretty limited. Obviously one of the easiest ways to play it is to get an actual GameCube and a physical copy and, you know, play it the way it was intended. But that is definitely going to set you back more than a few dollary dues, and I've seen copies of this thing going for hundreds of dollars on eBay. Which is, you know, absolutely ludicrous, but then on the other hand, it kinda does make perfect sense, given the game's limited release and also the fact that it's an exclusive for one of gaming's all-time most beloved consoles.
Oh, my stomach!
The other option, and probably more realistically, is emulation through Dolphin, which thankfully actually works pretty damn well, assuming you've got a beefy PC. Because as good as Dolphin Emulator is, it's definitely going to take its toll on performance if you don't have a decent rig. But I'd wager that this by far is how most people have played the Twin Snakes. In fact, I'd do you one better and say that out of all the most emulated games in the world, this is the one that most people have played, without ever having played the original on GameCube or without even owning a physical copy.
No, I'm serious.
If anything though, that just kind of tells you what kind of demand there is for a proper re-release, something which we'll hopefully see in the upcoming MGS Master Collection 2. Yeah, and hopefully a collection that this time will be an improvement over Konami's first efforts. Every time I go back and replay through the Twin Snakes, I do find myself being a bit more forgiving towards its shortcomings. And look, truth be told, it is far from being a bad game.
Come on, Snake.
At the end of the day, it still captures everything about what an MGS game is supposed to feel like. Taking on a wacky rogue gallery of bizarre freaks in these epic showdowns, engaging in classic tactical espionage action, right down to being able to see a woman walking around in her underwear.
Yeah, you got a great butt.
And regardless of how you feel about it, those components are there. No one can deny that. But at the end of the day, it's still lacking that magic from the original. And yes, Kojima might have given these guys his blessing and all that kind of crap, but who fucking cares? Like James Cameron gives his blessing every 2 or 3 years when they crap out another awful Terminator movie. That doesn't mean a thing.
Are we making the future every second with every choice that we make? Hell yeah, we are.
I have no problem with people saying that they enjoy playing through the Twin Snakes. I really don't. But what has always pissed me off is people who recommend playing it over the original. That is complete bollocks.
Yeah, why's that?
In the same way that I'd never recommend someone play Black Mesa before Half-Life. If all you want to do is play through Metal Gear Solid in a convenient way, well then the Master Collection, which has had a pretty good amount of updates since it first launched, is absolutely the best way to do it. Then if you don't mind getting lost in an emulation wormhole, there's always the option of playing through it with DuckStation instead. The thing I've always found though is that whenever you hear people going on about how much they love this remake and how amazing it is, more often than not it's coming from that crowd of people who played it before they played the original. And I get it, man, like going back and looking at the 98 version side by side to this, it can make it look archaic in comparison. But there was something undeniably innovative and groundbreaking with that original release that simply can't be recaptured, especially if all that's really improving is a better looking engine with a few new tricks. Either way though, I don't see the discussion surrounding this one dying down in the near future, and I'm sure if it ever actually does get released in some kind of updated collection anytime soon, well, we're going to see a whole lot of people bringing this discussion up all over again.
You're out of time!
Gray Fox!